Hey guys, John here. Today is a special video. I'm super excited to share the first preset pack available on the JonAudio Gumroad store. So this is kind of my take on a futuristic sci-fi world. So Planet Xeon. Now included in this box are going to be 20 usable presets, not that like 150 presets that come with maybe 5 good sounds. So with that being said, let's kind of get into this pack and let's see what it's all about. So if we pull it up here, we can see that we have some ARPs, basses, FX, we have leads, we have pads, and sequences. Now, most of these have all 4 macros. I think there's about 2 that just have 3. So let's start off with some leads here. And I have a little bit of drum groove in the background for some of these sounds. So we can kind of get a little bit of context to what they sound like. So this first one here is going to be called Bending Gravity. And it's going to sound something kind of like this. So on this one, we have FX for the first macro. So in case you want to use your own external effects, you can just bring the slider down. So it's just dry there. We have a little bit of glide here. So if you don't want the glide, you can turn that off. We have some noise groove. So take a listen to this noise groove here. We can kind of tuck that in if there's kind of like a rhythmic thing going on in our song and we kind of want to just push a little bit of that. You can control that here. And then we have a down sample that kind of just degrades the sound a little bit. Kind of maybe if there's some type of interference or something like that. So moving on, we have the Nether. Sounds something like this. So again, on this one, we have the effects. We can turn those on and off. We have some frequency modulation. So with that change here, it would be something like this. Then we have our traditional cutoff and resonance. Okay, so let's get into some of the sequences. So this one here is called Club 442, and it's kind of almost a futuristic club kind of vibe. So let's check that out here. So this one has the traditional cutoff, resonance, we have some distortion here, and the effects are pretty basic macros, but you can do a lot of different changes with these to kind of get a lot of different timbres for this one. This next one up here is called Split the Atom. This one's kind of interesting. So we have the cutoff, the resonance is kind of typical. We have the effects and then some distortion. However, this one's kind of cool because if we look at some of these functions, what's happening here is that over here on engine number 2, we're here on chord. So these voices come on the very end of the sequence here to give us a little bit of a chord. So check this out. So yeah, pretty cool there. This next sequence is called Waiting on Gravity. So let's check this guy out. So that one's kind of interesting too. It's almost kind of like a sequence, but it's kind of like a mysterious kind of thing going on here. And if we actually look at this patch here, the sequencer isn't actually on. This is actually done through the quantization of these notes here. So that's kind of where that is coming from. As we can see, this course is kind of moving back and forth with this random knob here. So that's kind of how that was generated. It's not technically done with the sequencer, but it still is a sequence for all intents and purposes. And some of these effects here are kind of interesting. We have the tone that kind of just changes the tone of the whole sound, obviously. And then we have this metal knob here, and this kind of almost gives that metallic-y vibe more towards the top end of this knob here. And then last but not least, we have air. All right, so moving on, we have some of our pads. Now, some of these are pretty cool. There's one of them in particular that I'll show you that takes a little bit more CPU, so I've had to drop down the polyphony, but if your computer can handle it, go ahead and crank that up. So first one here, we have Another Dimension. So this one's interesting because there's kind of a special thing going on with this one. So we have the effects, obviously, turn the effects on and off, which is kind of a staple for a lot of these patches. Then we have this texture knob here. So take a listen to the difference with the texture. It almost has kind of a rain kind of vibe to it a little bit. Kind of interesting there, but this one over here, this fifth or minor, so the way this works is if it's all the way to the right, the pad that we're going to be hearing also has a minor chord in it with the voices. If we turn this to the left, it's going to turn it into a fifth, so where it's not a minor. So take a listen, this is going to be fifth. And then now minor. And then the standard filter on the right. So yeah, that's how that one works. Pretty cool one right there. Next we have Cave of Lost Souls. And this is one of the ones I was talking about. This one is Polyphony on 2 because this can spike your CPU quite a bit. And also not to mention, with Polyphony 2, you don't really need a lot of chords for this one. This is more so meant for a kind of a soundscape kind of texturing going on in the background. So 1 or 2 notes is probably more than enough. All right, so with this one, we have the aggression that gets, I guess, a little bit more aggressive sound to it. We have some distortion, we have the typical effects knob, and then we have our filters. So kind of some basic macros there to control this pad here. Next up, we have Gods of Time, and this one is kind of inspired by that kind of formant kind of sound with a little extra specialties to this one. So off the bat, it sounds like this. Next, we have a vocal shift, so we can change the sound or the vocal from this formant filter here. It's kind of funny with the drum groove there. Next, we have guttural. So this one's kind of interesting. It was kind of hard to come up with a name for this, but I guess guttural kind of sounds the most right. So if we take our vocal shift all the way down, put our filter all the way up, and let's take the subtleties of this guttural knob and really try to see what it does here. So it's almost a little bit more of an aggressive kind of tone there. So our last pad here is going to be time dilation. All right, so with this one, we have that pulse width going on here with engine number 1, some phaser going on here, our typical FX knob, and then some distortion that really more so sounds like that, like breaking down type of interference sound. So moving on, let's check out some of these effects here. So we have this data transfer that I've kind of perfected after a little while, and it's kind of like if you're doing some type of data transferring, I guess, which is called data transfer. But anyway, this one is a sound effect here. And if you didn't notice, we have a couple different things going on here. So we have our effects, which is our basically reverb and delays and all that. Next, we have 2 different ambient tones to kind of set the vibe a little bit. So let's turn down this second one here, and this is the first ambient tone that we're going to hear. And then the second one is this one. And then both of these in conjunction is kind of cool because it makes it sound a little bit more like it's in a room or it's in some different kind of place. It's not just so dry and clean here. And last but not least, we have this crush it knob, which is a lot of bit crusher and downsampling going on. So that would be interesting to do like a random modulation with this knob here, because it's kind of like something's going in and out of connection. It's kind of losing things. You're kind of not really getting a clear sound. All right, and moving on from there, we have metallic death here. Then we have our standard FX, and then we have our distortion here, so all the way it would sound like this. Then no distortion. And then we also have this metallic tone. So what this is doing is that we move this here, we can see that this comb filter up over here is kind of moving in position. And depending on where those peaks are in that comb filter, it's going to give us a little bit different types of tone that sounds very metallic-y. So this is kind of a knob that you kind of want to go and move around and kind of pick a certain spot that you would kind of like that tonality from. And then we have our destroy knob over here. Just makes it sound a little bit more metallic-y, a little bit more nasty, so why not call it a destroy knob there? Next up, we have the plasma burst. And this is kind of similar to the metallic death, where we have the effects, distortion, and the metallic tone controlling this filter here. And these are all maps to different tones. So for example, if you're doing a song in C or something like that, press a C or maybe the fifth and it'll work perfectly fine for it. Next up, we have the teleportation station. So the interesting one, the way this one's kind of played, once we hold down a note, it's going to be sustaining that kind of movement back and forth, that stereo sound. And then once we let go, then it kind of just releases everything after that. So it's useful in the sense that you can have this as long or as short as you want. You can just hit it once real quick, and it'll fade away. Or you can hold it like I just did, and it'll stay. Also works with many different notes. So these macros here, we have our standard effects here. We have the stereo spread, and this is kind of more the things that are kind of bouncing left and right, and this is kind of how far we want to spread those. So take a listen with this knob and how much those are spread. Next up, we have the distortion. And then some FM to make sure everything's a little bit more nasty than it should be. All right, moving on from there, we have some arpeggios here. This one is called Burn the Sun, so we have a little bit of drums here to kind of put this into context. So there we go. So that kind of arpeggio is very useful for almost kind of a sequence kind of sound or a groove or something like that, because we can hold down one note and we're still going to get that grooviness to it. All right, moving on from there, we have this ARP Escape the Archons. And this one's kind of fun too because we have that weird kind of glide also with an arpeggio here. All right, for that one, we have our typical effects here with distortion, the stereo spread. And then our glide, if you're not too fancy on the glide, we can always turn that down to have a non-glide arpeggio. Moving on from there, we have Travel the Horizon. that one's kind of obviously inspired by the 303, but more of a futuristic kind of sound here. So I took a lot of the elements of what makes a 303 a 303 and kind of brought that as an ARP and then kind of maybe futurized it a little bit or something like that. But hopefully that makes kind of sense. This is one of my personal favorites in this one. Moving on, we have some basses. So this first one is called Latex Bass. Now this one has a little bit of a drum, or not a drum groove, but a noise groove here, and that's his first macro here. It can be used almost as a bass, a riser, or something kind of futuristic with a nice little drum groove, especially if there's some drums in the background. So this patch actually doubles up as quite a few different kind of sounds. We have our groove in there for that noise. We have the filter that kind of obviously changes the timbre. Almost kind of talk boxy. And then we have this halftime knob. So if this rhythm is a little bit too fast for you, we can always slow it down to halftime. Same patch, same groove, same everything, just a little bit slower here. Next up, we have the flanger that can almost be used as a riser for certain situations. Then change the halftime. So there's a lot of possibilities with this one as well. Also increasing this noise could help also make that tension a little bit more increased. I think you get the idea. Next up, we have Obsidian Bass. Now this one's kind of more so one of those like pluck basses or kind of house futuristic pluck basses here. Now this is how it comes out of the box, but what's really interesting is we have a couple different tone or controls here to change the tone. So the first one here being tone aside from the filter, but check this out. Then this heavy knob. So it comes very instant out of the box, right? It's like, oh, that's a nice little sweet little bass there. Can be pretty crazy. And then we have this radiation up. So this one is kind of weird to name because it almost degrades the sound, does a weird thing to it. So check this out. It's almost like if there's strings that are kind of loose and not really tightened, I guess, or old or something like that. It's very strange what it actually does here. Moving on, we have Plasma Bass. And this one's kind of like a hard bass kind of thing too, which is interesting because we have a little bit of reverb that doesn't really get too much in the way here. So here's dry. And then we have some reverb. Kind of gives a little bit of space, and then we have a natural distortion. And then this is interesting here. We have the fifth. So by tuning this, your bass almost becomes a bass with a perfect fifth attached to it. this is one of the ones that doesn't have a fourth macro here, so this one is unassigned, which also reflects in the documentation. Moving on, we have rhythmic bass here. Now this one's kind of fun too because we have a couple different speeds here, so check this out. So modulating this time knob, you can get a lot of cool different grooves here. Then we have our different tones for this here. Our resonance, and then a distortion. So we get a lot of crazy sounds with these macros down here. And I believe that is all for this pack here. So if you like what you hear, if you want to get yourself a copy of this, there's a link in the video description below. So let me know what you guys think about it. It is available. So yeah, go on and get it if you would like. Thank you so much for watching. And hopefully we're going to be having more preset packs in the future. And yeah, see you in the next video.